Hi everybody, my name is Jerry Bartles and I'm a Sales and Technical Enablement Manager here at Autodesk, responsible for the infrastructure products. I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation, where we'll be walking through some of the What's New functionality that's available in Civil 3D 2015. When looking at Civil 3D 2015, at least from a What's New perspective, we'll see that the enhancements that have been made to the application will fall primarily as it relates to transportation workflows, and specifically in four major categories. Those being user experience, detailed engineering, production drafting, and collaboration. We'll begin by talking about each one of the four categories, and then I'll do a demonstration where we'll touch on some of those different individual features. Starting with user experience, some of the things that we'll see is Civil 3D is built on top of AutoCAD, so the enhancements to the AutoCAD interface have moved forward into Civil 3D, as well as enhancements to map have moved forward into Civil 3D as well. With those enhancements, not only we see like a darker interface, we'll start to see some enhanced feedback as we execute some of the commands. There are also some improvements that have been made to performance with large objects, most notably in point clouds. And then we'll see also some enhancements that have been requested when it comes to geographic location and our abilities to leverage that aerial photography. Another thing that you'll see as we move through and talk about these features and enhancements that have been made to the application is they are primarily user-driven. So over the past several years, feedback has been collected from a number of our users, and that feedback was used primarily to shape a lot of the functionality that you're going to see in our demo today. Next, we'll touch on detailed engineering functionality. We'll see that there have been some enhancements made to laying out or working with profiles as well as corridors. And then finally, subassembly composer. So if you're in a position to make some subassemblies to use within your corridor model for those things that maybe exist beyond what ships with the standard program, there's been some enhancements with subassembly composer that will allow you to do some things like create voids, also do some offsetting, and just make the overall process of making subassemblies a little bit easier to work with. But in short, from a detailed engineering standpoint, the enhancements we're going to see are going to help us with our flexibility and our efficiency as we do detailed engineering or design. Next, when it comes to production drafting, we'll see a couple of things have been added to the application, one of which is going to be annotation enhancements. We'll touch on both of those. The other is sliced solids. This is some functionality that we've seen in the past, and the ability to project objects maybe into sections. This will give us the ability to slice through objects and project those objects into a profile. And in short, basically the enhancements to production drafting will allow us to be more productive in those deliverables that we create. Finally, the last category is on collaboration. We won't spend a lot of time from a demo perspective on this particular area. Some of the functionality, for example, like being able to export to KML, we can also export to KMZ. This is some functionality that used to exist back in Civil 3D in 2012 when there was we used to have some Google export utilities. Today, that functionality, when that tool was discontinued, had gone away, but now the ability to export our geometry to KML and KMZ has been returned. The software has also been enhanced in its ability to export our Civil 3D information to DWG or DGN file formats. And probably the most important, or the one that's been asked for primarily by our customers, is to have better consistency between different versions of Civil 3D. So one of the big things that you'll see is from a 2015 perspective, we can open and edit 2015 drawings are backward and forward compatible to 2013 and 2014. So for those folks that maybe need to complete a project in 2014 but would like to start working with the application in 2015, we can now effectively be able to move files in that back and forth between the different versions. So that's going to give us the ability to collaborate a lot better with maybe other organizations, our people internally, and also be able to be in a better position to deliver exactly what our project requires. So with that, I'm going to move over into my demonstration, and we'll start to look at some of these enhancements. I'll begin inside Civil 3D 2015, and one of the first things that we see is we've got a darker interface. Once again, Civil 3D is built on top of Map and AutoCAD had some enhancements as it relates to the interface, so we're starting to see the effects of that from the minute we get into the application. Now the first thing that we see is we've got a darker background, but it's a lot more than a darker background. The interface itself is actually a lot more intuitive to work with than what we had previously had in the past. We'll see that now when the application opens, we've got a couple of tabs we can work with, Create and Learn. In the Create tab, we can start to do things like create a new drawing. We'll see our areas for templates are available underneath here. We can open files, also deal with sample drawings and sheet sets. We can see a listing of our recent documents. We can control perhaps the size and how many of those displayed in the dialog. If we would like access to our Autodesk 360 account, we've got an area right here where we can connect very quickly. The ability to pick up information about the application and learn more about what it does. We now have a tab for Learn that we can move over, where there are some nice videos that will walk through some of the new functionality that exists in 2015, as well as some of the traditional Getting Started videos that walk through creating some of the objects that we would work with most often in a Civil 3D environment. There's an area here that will notify us if there are service packs or other hot fixes that need to be added to our application, as well as a very nice online resource that's called knowledge.autodesk.com. I think that's the site that exists. But if we go there, it's our ability to get information about our application, learn different things about how other people are using it, because a lot of the content that gets posted to the knowledge base in this area is going to be things that are posted by users. So with that, I'm going to flip back to the Create tab. Let's go ahead and open some drawings, and we can start to look at some of this functionality. So we'll just grab, I'll actually grab a number of drawings here. We'll open them all up at one time. And as these open, we'll see that we have tabs at the top of the screen that will give us access to all of the drawings. I've got multiple files open, and those tabs will give me an ability to quickly move back and forth between each one of those. And what I can do is, maybe as some of these start to open, I can click and move around with the tabs to organize them on the screen, and maybe in order that makes more sense and how I will be going through the data. So we'll start at the beginning with user experience. That was the first category that we had talked about. What I'd like to do is maybe start by just looking at help. There is some really cool stuff that has happened from a help perspective that we can start to take advantage of. So we'll go ahead and open that up. With our help open up on the screen, the first thing that I would point out, because obviously we're not going to have time to go through every new feature or new enhancement that exists in Civil 3D 2015, I can touch on the new features in this area, and it will walk through and explain to me all of the new things that are included in 2015. Some of those even have been the extensions that were available in 2014 for the corridor solids, and other things have been rolled forward into the application. We'll see the enhancements to corridor modeling and profiles, annotation, our ability to export data. We can also come down and we can start to click links to see specifically all of the new functionality that exists in AutoCAD and Map. So with that, just the first thing I would point out that what I would do is go through the application, maybe poke around in here. You'll see far more than, like I said, we won't have time to cover everything. We'll just cover some of the main things, but this will give you an all-inclusive list of everything that's available. The other thing from a help perspective that's really nice is, as we start walking through the application, if you're an AutoCAD user, maybe using Civil 3D for the first time, we don't always know where perhaps commands that we use from an AutoCAD perspective, where those exist mainly, or where they would pop up in the ribbon in Civil 3D, or vice versa. If we were to come down and look at, say, perhaps viewports, I always called that was like the poor man's dual monitors. We're able to split our screen into pieces and then work from there. We can come into the help screen, we could type in the command, and when we click on command, there's an option here that I can use called find. And if I click on find, it will automatically take me to the tab, and it will give me an arrow that will point directly to where it is. Now, you're not seeing the arrow right now because I'm currently running Camtasia to record this presentation, but if Camtasia were not running, When we were to select find, it would automatically take me to that ribbon and it would start pointing into the area of where that command is. And that can be a very helpful thing because if, like I said, if we're an AutoCAD person getting comfortable with the Civil 3D interface and the tools that exist in there, I'd like to still run some of the AutoCAD commands, but I can't find it in the ribbon. That's one of the really nice tools and help is I can type something in. It will allow me to go there very quickly. So let's start to take a look at some of these commands in action. We'll actually even start with viewports. I'm going to split my screen in half horizontally. And then I'd like to break it up, maybe look at a couple different areas. Well, if you've used viewports before, we always had to go through some pre-configured commands or maybe a text or command line driven interface. We can now start to leverage some of the AutoCAD functionality, and that there's a plus sign that I can start to use to lay out my viewports. And the cool part about that is it's completely drag and drop. So I mean, we can start to resize, make them bigger, make her smaller. We can merge them together, a much more efficient way to work with viewports. So we'll start by maybe zooming in a couple different areas here that we'll take a little closer look at. We'll come in, maybe look into this area as well, and maybe this point on the bottom. We'll rotate our display, and we'll start by looking down here. All right, with my screen reconfigured, I'm just going to regen to clean up my graphics just a little bit. And if we start, one of the first things that I want to see is as I work in this new environment, I get a lot of visual feedback with the different things that I'm doing. So for example, if we were to come in and modify and start to execute commands like trim, if we were to select our cutting edges, now just by hovering over the object, we can see immediately what would be trimmed. So we can basically experience what's going to happen with the command before we actually ever execute it. Other commands that for example, it can be very helpful with that is break, especially on a circle. If we're going to break, we can see exactly how much of the circle is going to be left based on the points that we pick. We can even extend that further into some other commands we might use on a day-to-day basis. For example, fillet. If I've got two lines to come together at a point, maybe at a parking island or something that I may be designing and I want to put a radius in there, I may not know immediately what radius I'd like to use. So if I go to enter a fillet, we'll pick 2 points, and we can already see the radius that's been applied. If I'd like to maybe look at a different radius, I'm going to hit the down arrow here. We'll select radius. Right now it's at 160. Let's try something that's closer to 100. We'll hover over this edge. I can see what that looks like. I can hit the down arrow. Maybe I can set that to 200 and hover over that. So it effectively lets me try before I buy, if you will. So I can put the radius in at 200 and I'm ready to go. So you think about that from some commands, especially from a fillet perspective. You know how many times we maybe execute the command, the radius isn't quite what we wanted. We'd go back and change it several times until we get the result that we're looking for here. With this new visual feedback, we can start to experiment with some things without ever actually finishing the command until we're ready to. Next thing I want to look at is we're going to take a look at some match properties, and we can see that from a hatch perspective. This is a hatch that's currently being used. I can hover over any other hatch, and I can see the effects that that's going to be before we ever complete the command. In this case, we'll go forward with that. I can also use match properties for some complex line types, which is kind of nice that we hover over the top of it. We can see the effect of the line type before it ever the command ever completes. And if we start to do things like grip edit in the geometry, now we can see the effects of the complex line types before we ever end. So if you work with line types that have symbology or text, now whereas in the past we would make edits and not really know what the effects of those edits would look like, we can now see that throughout the entire process so that when we're finished we get exactly the results we're looking for. Another thing that's kind of cool is there's been some enhancements when it comes to text or mtext. For example, if I was going to put some text in the dialogue here, I used to work for a company that everything that we had to do was in uppercase. We had 2 rules when we worked on a project or a particular customer. It was all the text had to be uppercase was rule number 1, and rule number 2 was there was no exceptions to rule number 1. So we constantly had the caps lock turned on. So with the caps lock turned on, the problem that we would run into is if you go to work on something later, maybe a different project where that wasn't the rule, you'd run into a situation where you'd start typing, and if with the caps lock turned on, I go to type, and you get something like this. If I were to type, "This is sample text," All right, and then what happens after you finish typing, then you have to go back and correct it. Well, now there's been some enhancements, some intelligence put into the application that if that type of a situation occurs, when I hit the space bar to move on, it not only corrects it to what it should be, but it automatically turns the cap locks off so that I can continue on and go from there. All right, so really nice tools, and like I said, if you're a user of the software that you poke around in it every single day, you're going to find all different types of enhancements in all different areas. Once again, as I mentioned during the PowerPoint presentation, is a lot of the features and functionality and enhancement that you see in this release was specifically driven by the end users. So requests that were made by those folks that these things be included in the application. So last thing I want to take a look at in this area is, if we think for a minute about what not necessarily command, but what we do most often when we work in this environment. All right, we think about that. I asked that during one of my sessions. Some people said zoom. Unfortunately, one individual said undo. The area that we're looking for is selecting objects. All right, we select objects more than we do anything because every command that we work with, for the most part, is going to require some form of object selection. So there's a very cool function as it relates to selecting objects in this version of the software. It's called lassu. And there's a lot of different ways we can select objects. Most people limit themselves to picking with a window or individually picking. But now if I wanted to specifically grab some objects, I can hold down the left mouse button and I can kind of strategically create a lasso that's going to go around and pick only those things that fall completely within the window, or in this case, because it's a green boundary, those things that are crossed by the window. So by default, it will give me crossing. If I hit spacebar, it automatically converts to window, and you can see also with the highlighting that I can see immediately before I ever complete the command what objects are going to be selected as a result of this. So lasso alone, like I said, anything that we can do that's going to improve our ability to select objects is going to make us more productive just by the fact that we're more efficient in how we do that. So very, very nice tools. If you've not used the other select object functionality within the application, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at some of the other options that are there as well. All right, let's step down to the next drawing. In this particular case, I have a point cloud. So if I select, we see a point cloud has been brought in. This was created through a number of scans, brought into Recap, created an RCP file, and then brought into Civil 3D. The point that I wanted to make here is it relates to size and our ability to deal with much larger data more efficiently than what we have maybe been able to do in the past. I'll maybe bump up my point size here just a touch to give it a little bit more of a solid finish. But as we do that, this point cloud is over 4 million points. I can come into my interface now, and I can start to spin and zoom and pan, get closer and back and forth in and out on my object, and you can see the performance is virtually instantaneous with 4 million points or a 4 million point cloud. All right, so when it comes to performance, especially as it relates to graphics, you will see substantial improvements in the new functionality that's been included in AutoCAD, which rolls up into Civil 3D. The next thing we'll touch on is some geolocation. Now, if I were to have you take a look at this and ask you, well, what is it? Most people would probably respond that it's some form of a building. But from a building perspective, that's really all we can tell. For us to get some idea of how big it is, or maybe where it's at, or something like that, we need to have some context around the building itself. And that's hard to do with just the outline. Getting that context, especially aerial photography or maybe a street map, has been challenging in the past. The last version of the software we could bring in that imagery through geolocation, but we were limited in our ability to deal with that. So that some of those limits have been removed, and I'm going to show you that right now. We'll start with the building, and because we're working in Civil 3D, we've already got a projection assigned to this drawing, so with a projection assigned, we're basically ready to go. There's now a geolocation tab available to us, or ribbon available to us directly within Civil 3D. From here, I could come in and maybe turn on the road display. So as that comes in, it's going to show me the road display. I can zoom out and I can start to see information about the surrounding location, whether it be roads, highway, subdivision, whatever the case may be, and get some perspective about my particular area. Or I could come up and I could take a look at an aerial photograph. We click on aerial photograph and we can see, our building is actually a hotel that is adjacent to a much larger conference center with a fair amount of parking and a highway interchange very close by. Now, we had, once again, we had this ability to do this in the last version, but you'll see, like, if we go to the layout, if I were to try and print those results, I was never able to capture that aerial photography or that street map. So that was very helpful in being able to see things in context, but not as helpful in my ability to convey that to other people or be able to use that as part of my projects or my exhibits. All right, what we have in 2015 is a new tool here now for capture area. I can click and I can capture an area of the viewport. I can also capture just an area of the screen. And that area that I capture, it will determine my resolution in that based on where I'm located in the file. We'll see that as we zoom in, depending on the aerial photography and the resolution that's available, it will update for us on the screen. In this particular case, we'll just go with here. We'll say capture area. I'm going to create a window around that. That area has now been captured such that I can view it offline and save it within my file. So you'll see now that I'm able to turn the map off. The imagery remains. There's a caption that's showing me that that's coming from the Bing maps or data that's available through Microsoft. If I come to my layout tab now, I can also see that that information is available such that it can be printed. All right, so within 2015, I'm sure you'll start to see the theme that folks had requested that in the last version, that we were able to keep that imagery persistent within the file such that it can be printed or viewed offline, and now we have that ability available to us in 2015. Next, I'm going to shift gears, and we're going to start to look at profiles a little bit. So this is going to start to take us into from the user interface or user experience area, and we're going to start to move more into detailed engineering. I'm going to come down and look at my profile on the end here. And one of the things that I want to share with you is you'll see my proposed profile ends here. My existing comes out in this direction. If you're somebody that's used the profile before or used the Civil 3D in the past for creating profiles or corridors, if your existing and proposed geometry don't necessarily end at the same point within your defined profiles, you can have like a severe drop-off that appears in your corridor that then you have to come back and find a way to resolve. In some cases, it's just getting them to end at exactly the same point. And it would be great if we had a tool that you could extend the proposed geometry to end at the same point that the existing does. And in the past, we didn't have that ability, but now we do. So if I select the geometry, we can come into the geometry editor, and you'll see there is a new tool here now that says Extend Entity. So we'll say Extend, come down and select that entity, and it will extend it out to meet the end of my profile view. So with that, I can right-click. You'll see that my profile has been updated and my annotation has updated accordingly. Now the great part about that is we can use that not only on the ends, but if we have some partial geometry that makes up our roadway, we can start to extend some of that geometry, maybe curves or other things, to maybe back into a solution, having maybe a line and a curve back into another point such that we can create another element within our roadway for our roadway design. So very, very useful tool. Another feature request that was asked for by a number of our customers was the ability to work with geometry once it's been created. For example, our vertical curves have been created in such a way that in this case it was created with length of vertical curve. That kind of limited our ability to make changes to it after the fact. It was made by length of curve. You wanted to adjust it at length of curve, we were limited by that. We can now come in, we'll maybe look at this entity based, and I'm going to select this curve. And you'll see now that my parameter constraints, I can unlock those, and then I can start to change the definition to something different. So for example, maybe I could change that to a K value. The K value is 224, maybe we round that to 220. All right, and when we come out of the command, we'll see my geometry update. So my K value is now 220, and that was the limiting factor that was used in that. Let's go ahead and select my entity, grab my curve here. We'll drop out and pull that up one more time. So we'll say entity based, grab my curve, and in this case maybe we'll switch it to, we'll leave it to false, and I'm going to switch it to through point. And maybe we'll set something to maybe 70 plus 10. And once again, if we close that, execute the command, we see that it's been updated. And also, if we grab the geometry, we now see that there's a pass-through point at that particular station, and we can begin to modify it based on that. All right, so once again, from a detailed design standpoint, we have much more flexibility in the geometry we create. Maybe it's created using one set of parameters initially. We now have the ability that we can go back and we can make adjustments to those parameters such that we can redefine it or maybe adjust our design using exactly the values that make the most sense for us. All right, furthering our discussion on the profiles, and one of the more exciting things for me when it comes to my geometry here is we have relationships in Civil 3D between many of our objects. And what I mean by that is if one object changes, that change can propagate through the rest of the model and reflect changes in a number of other areas. So if an elevation changes, that could reflect a difference in a profile, could reflect differences in earthwork calculations, some annotations, and otherwise. What we can do here now is there's some new relationships between our proposed profile and also our horizontal alignment. So if I grab my proposed profile and we take a look at the properties, I can see that there's now the concept of profile locking. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to anchor my proposed geometry to the centerline alignment such that if the centerline alignment is updated, those areas that are affected by that change will be highlighted in my profile, and those areas that aren't affected will remain the same. And what that does is it gives me the ability to make some decisions, or at least know, based on my changes to my alignment, where exactly to look in my profile for the impact of those changes. So for example, if we came in and just made a change to my profile and did this, obviously the stationing is now going to be different. All right, the location of some of my geometry is going to be different from the point that I'm starting at now until it reaches a certain point down the profile. So that will affect the proposed geometry that I've laid out, especially if it was by station and elevation of PVIs and the like. So we've made that change. I'm going to come back and look at the profile now, and we see in the profile that I now have warning symbols that shows me that as a result of that change, there is the potential that this geometry should be checked. So if we hover over my warning symbol here, maybe I'll try hovering over this guy. There we go. A horizontal geometry change affected this element. Make sure the element is still valid. All right, so once again, just that change impacted potentially the proposed geometry that I created up to this point. Let's take a look at this to see how this works even closer. If I adjust the PVI at this point to match up exactly with the high point at my curve or my existing ground at this point, we'll take a look at that, and then I'm going to come back to my viewports here, split my screen vertically, and we'll look at that. We see that it's at station 5581. I'm going to come back and look at my geometry here. Once again, if I were to make a change at this point and move it, say, from here to here, the impact of my proposed change is not going to alter maybe the proposed roadway at that point, but it will affect how it matches up with the existing. So if you think about it, my new existing profile will shift. I would expect my proposed geometry that is now locked to the horizontal alignment or that location to also shift. And when I pick, you see it updates, it continues to move down, and it remains tied exactly to that same point. All right, so profile locking is a fantastic feature that it keeps our geometry in sync if we're working with long roadway projects and we're making changes to part of the geometry at a particular point, I can now feel free to affect or make changes to that geometry in my alignment and then know immediately what geometry within my proposed profile needs to be checked or verified as a result of that change. All right, so very, very important tool for us to work with. Let's take my viewport here. We'll open that up so we're back to 1. Look at a couple more things here. I'm going to flip over to corridors. And as I look at corridors, we have some limitations when it comes to frequency when we build a corridor. And why is this a concern? Well, the corridors that we create, we have the ability to load those into a machine for like automated machine guidance or something that would start to, lay out curb or pavement automatically without staking. So we want to make sure that the model we create for our corridor is the most accurate representation of our design possible. Now, when we start adding things like frequency, especially as we go around a curve, that frequency can start to create facets, because as it moves from one point to the other, we'll start to get a faceted edge. If you could assume for a minute, if I had a very large radius and I were to have the frequency set very low, it would be almost like a hexagon or a pentagon with the sides that are created. And if that was the model that was used when it was pushed out into the field, we would obviously get some phone calls when the machine started to lay that out onto the ground. Now, historically, what folks have done to kind of overcome any issues with frequency is they start to set the frequency in their corridor model to, like a foot for spacing. And then that just gets to be overkill. Our corridor gets to be larger than it needs to be. And we need, some ability to better control the frequency so that we get enough definition to lay this out accurately, but not too much definition that it starts to become a burden on performance. In Civil 3D 2015, we now have the ability to quickly do this. I'm going to select my corridor. We'll come up to Edit Frequency. And the area, the thing that I would have you pay close attention to is historically on tangents, we would set an incremental value, and then we could set one on curves, and we could also set one on spirals. One of the options that we now have in the application is we can come down and we can set our alignment or our frequency by curvature. And by curvature, I can set a midordinate distance. In this case, I'm going to set it to 0.10. And the beautiful thing about this is what it will do is based off that midordinate distance, the size of my curve, whether it be larger or smaller, the midordinate distance will make sure and maintain an appropriate level of frequency across whatever the curve may be. So it's, once again, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not the brute force method of setting a 1 foot increment to get like the smallest spacing, the smoothest curve. I can now do it very efficiently, very elegantly now with this curvature and midordinate distance. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. All right, it's going to update my model. I'm not going to see a lot of it in the curve that I have here because I'm getting a fair amount of frequency also that's being added because of my alignment offset, some of the targets that I'm tying to. So, we think about that. I've improved my situation perhaps down the center of the road, but I still have other situations outside on the edge that, how do I effectively control something like this? I mean, this is obviously entrances perhaps to shopping center or something off of the main roadway. Those entrances are in some form of radius. Those happen to be faceted as well. How do we address that in 2015? Well, we've got a similar switch for those now as well. So if I take and grab my corridor, we'll say Edit Frequency. Oops, we'll grab my corridor. We'll say Edit Frequency. And if I come back and look, you'll now see offset targets. So we're going to say, first thing, offset target tangent curves, or target curves, I'm sorry, we'll say by curvature, same values that we have up here. I'm going to leave that at a tenth for my midordinate distance as well. We'll say OK. And when we do that, you notice now that it's increased the frequency in those areas that make up the curves of my targets. One more thing that I would like to draw your attention to is from an entrance perspective, I'm getting a situation sometimes where, it's going to triangle back to this point. And in many cases, from a grading or a design perspective, it would be much better if it were to take the end of my target and just grade back to the corridor and not be creating these extra triangles that I have to deal with. I'd maybe rather grade or design that in the rest of the roadway or intersection that comes into this. The last switch that we're going to take a look at here, we'll say edit frequency. There is an option here that says adjacent to offset target. We'll say yes. And when I say OK, we'll now see that those things are tied back to the corridor model quite nicely. And if we were to come in now and set up another roadway or another portion of a corridor, we could grade that separate from this one without having to worry about any overlap. And at the end of the day, all of this remains dynamic, such that if I grab my offset target, or my target that I'm connecting to, I can continue to update this, and you see the impact that it has on my my corridor and my frequency, and that it will continue to update as I move my way across. All right, so once again, very, very nice functionality. The importance of this functionality from a corridor perspective is it puts us in a position to create an even more accurate corridor model that can be leveraged with things like machine guidance or the construction of pavement through some mechanism other than staking it in the field. The next thing I want to touch base on, we'll take a look at some corridor targets. What I have here is I've got a roadway that's already been completed. It's got a widening in this area, maybe to accommodate maybe a bus pickup area or something is adjacent to the roadway that would require that. I'm going to grab the corridor model, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to edit targets. And if we take a look at the targets, we see that there is a width alignment target. It is a polyline, and my subassembly lane super elevation AOR is currently tied to that. All right, now once again, if I'm doing some sophisticated or maybe even not so sophisticated, some simple roadway or corridor modeling, there are going to be times when maybe that I'm updating some of the subassemblies that make up my design. Maybe I start with a particular assembly or a group of subassemblies, and then those need to change over time. Well, if you've done this in the past, the changing of a subassembly, especially if it's using targets, that becomes a problem because now I needed to manually go back and reattach those targets. We now have the ability in 2015 that we can start to swap out some of these subassemblies, and if their width or offset targets have similar names and similar target types, it will automatically reconnect the targets for us. So let's take a quick look at that. We're going to back up, and my assembly for this guy is down here. So let's take a look at that on the screen, and what I'm going to do is we'll bring up some of my my tool palette with some additional sub-assemblies that we can work with. I'm going to go with this one because it's going to be obvious that it's a difference in my, or a change in the assembly that I'm currently working with. So we'll do lane outside super multi-layer. So if I pick that, right-click, there's an option that I can replace, and I'm going to come up and replace this particular subassembly. All right, when I do that, Civil 3D now comes up and detects that, hey, this previous subassembly had targets that were attached to it, and you have the potential now to apply those to the newest subassembly. Would I like to do that? And in my case, I'm going to say yes, I'd like to keep similar targets. We can easily see that this particular subassembly is very different than the one we had before. Let's back up and look at our roadway. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the corridor model, and let's go ahead and update or rebuild that corridor. And when I do that, I'd have you watch the screen. It's updated, but we really didn't see any change. And we didn't want to really see a change because the slope of the lane, and that was the same. Really, the only thing that's different is the depth or the levels of pavement that exist for that subassembly. If we grab the corridor model here, let's come back and take a look at edit targets. We see that same width alignment polyline, but now that is tied to the lane outside super multi-layer. So in basically one click, replacing that subassembly, we're able to automatically maintain all the targets we had before. And like I said, if you're someone that's done a lot of road design, you maybe do some custom subassemblies, you want to swap those out as part of your corridor model or what's been created. Historically, that process was a bit more cumbersome because if those subassemblies had targets associated with them, we would have to go through the process of reconnecting those targets. We now have the ability within 2015 to have those targets maintained for us during a change like that. Let's maybe take one more look at this perhaps in the object viewer so that you can see the effects of that change, because otherwise it's kind of difficult to see that anything actually happened there. And if we come up and look, you can easily see that it has gone through with the corridor model and it has updated that subassembly now to reflect that much deeper, that super multi-layer subassembly. All right, so very nice tools from a profile or a corridor perspective that will assist us with our detailed design. We'll shift gears once more and we're going to take a look at one more option here, that being some annotation. We'll look at a couple of things that are available to us. I've got a roadway that was created here. Let's maybe change my scale for just a moment that we can see that a little bit easier. I've got a roadway that was created and I've got some sample lines, some sections that were created as well. What I'd like to do is start to create some section views so that we can see the context of my proposed roadway and the existing conditions. So we'll maybe change my scale to a 10 scale for my sections here. Let's go ahead and we'll create a section view. We'll just create one. And I'm going to just spin it up. We'll take section 8. Create new section view. We'll pick on the screen, and as I zoom up to look at the section, we see a situation like this. I would like to annotate a number of things in my section. The center of the road, the elevation at the crown. I'd like to maybe also capture the offset in the elevation of the edge of travelway or the edge of pavement shoulder, maybe daylight. All right, as we start to add more annotation to this, the annotation can start to overlap itself and get difficult to read. Now, we do have some tools that can assist with this, but unfortunately it's a bit of a manual process. And if we needed to clean up a lot of these, it would take us some time to do that. There has existed in the past within Civil 3D the ability to create some staggered annotation in different styles, but never before in the cross-section or the section area. We now have that functionality available to us today. And the way that it works is it works through kind of like a switch. If I hover over the label here, we see that the style that's being used is ADESC sections plot, and that comes from the standard code set style. So if we look at the code set style here for or multi-purpose styles, we'll look at code set styles. We see that here is the ADESC. Let's see, it was ADESC sections plot. It's this definition here. This was used. All right, there is a new one that has been created that will let us do these sections. If we come down to sections now and we look at label styles, there is a new one here now for corridor points, and we can set up the definition to basically match what's been used here. All right, now why we have it two different ways. There's kind of like the old way that it can be done. There's a new way that it can be done. And the reason that we have it both ways is we have a number of customers that have come up with some really creative ways to and really sophisticated styles to better handle situations like this, rather than just going a completely different route and switching the game on them. You can still continue to label it the way that it has historically been done. Or we now have the option that we can label the points or the sections with this new corridor points label style that's available to be tied to our sections. So that style has already been created. It's defined exactly the same as these. What I'm going to do next is, for me to use it, I have to put it in a label set, very similar to like a label set we would put on an alignment. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new label set here. We'll give it the name, we'll say ADSK staggered. And we'll come to labels, and we're going to use that corridor points. Using my offset elevation, we'll add that to the list. We now see that there is an option that we can set it to staggering both sides. And then I can start to control, once again, much like I would other values within staggering as I would for other styles that exist in Civil 3D. So it controls like the distance up and the distance over that it's going to do the staggering. So we'll do 0.1 and 0.15. We'll say OK. I'm going to do one more thing with that label set defined now. I'm going to come down to my commands here for section views. And in commands, we'll say anytime I create section views, this is where I can throw the switch. So we'll say section view creation, should the corridor point labeling method be the code set style, which was the old way, or label set style, which is the new way. All right. Now I've picked a number of things to make this work. I'm just showing you the options. If you're familiar with it, why we have both, how the switch is flipped. Would I be doing this every time? Absolutely not. I would have this set as part of my template, and then in the future I would use that moving forward, but just to show you how that gets set and how we would use that functionality. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll say OK. I will come out here once again. We will create another section view. We'll come down and maybe we'll do 850 in this point. We'll say section display options. We will do one other thing. This could also be set as part of my template. I'm going to set a label set to staggered. Create section view. When I pick my point, you see now that when my sections come in, that my annotation is automatically staggered such that I don't have overstrikes when my labels come in. All right, so now whether I'm dealing with one section or I'm dealing with hundreds of sections or even pages and pages and pages of sections, what would have been before maybe a tedious task of moving around some of the labels to make it more easy to read, we now have some tools within 2015 to facilitate that process and make that much easier to do. The last thing that I want to look at from an annotation production drafting standpoint, we'll look at, I'm going to set my scale back up to, let's go to maybe to 20 for a minute here. Labels. If I'm going to start adding some labels to my project, in many cases I can grab the object, we'll come to labels, we'll say spot elevation, we'll put one here, and then maybe I'll do a slope. We'll do a 1-point slope, and I'm going to pick right here. And these labels, because I grabbed the surface for my roadway, the annotation was automatically added and is consistent with what I would expect for that particular object. So I see the slope of my road is a little over 2%, and I see the elevations. Now, if I like this annotation and I would like to use it someplace else, maybe I'd like to use it out in this location. All right, historically, that could be a problem because if we move these labels out here, they were created and therefore tied. They've got a relationship to this object. So if they are moved outside the limits of that object or in some other location, they're going to keep referring back to the object where they were created. So let's try this. We're going to copy, we'll copy these objects here from from this point out to here. And when I drop them, they do exactly what we would expect. They would turn into question marks because it doesn't know what to display because the object isn't out there. All right, historically, that would have been a problem for us. We would be forced to recreate that annotation to be able to use it with other objects or associate it with other Civil 3D components. What we can do now is we can select one or multiple objects using the standard AutoCAD properties dialog. We now see that there is an option here that tells us what Civil 3D component they're tied to. In this case, we see it's tied to the top surface. I'm going to tie them instead to the existing ground. And when I do that, we see that that annotation is now consistent with the style that was used, but is now associated with a completely different object. All right. Now, where this can be helpful, maybe you know, back at the intersection, we've got a fire hydrant whose annotation is tied to this alignment, and the decision is made we'd like it instead station and offset to a different alignment. In the past, we would have to go through and recreate a lot of that annotation. Now we simply select the object, we change the associated, we select the label, change the associated civil component or object that it's tied to, and the annotation updates for us. All right, so from a production drafting standpoint, some very, very useful tools that will help make us more efficient, give us some more flexibility than what we've historically had. So with that, I am going to flip back to my PowerPoint here. So just a brief summary. We've looked at the 4 different areas, or talked about the 4 different areas in any respect. Of the things that have been updated in the Civil 3D 2015 from looking at it through the lens of what's new. From the user interface, we talked about those things that have been updated in the user interface from an AutoCAD perspective, how those can roll forward, assist us in a Civil 3D world. We saw a little bit about the enhanced feedback. We saw some about the productivity with the point cloud, benefits of the geographic location, the fact that we can capture and make persistent in our drawing that aerial photography or the street maps. We saw some enhancements from detailed engineering, from profile and corridor standpoints, and different things that we can do there to have an even more accurate corridor model or project that we can use with, even more effectively with things like machine guidance. We also started to touch base on some things with production drafting. We looked at ways that we can annotate cross sections with staggered labels, as well as go in and reassociate some of that annotation to different objects. All right, and then finally collaboration. We talked about that, didn't necessarily do very much with it. It gets into some exporting options that we have, KML, KMZ, which we were able to do back in the 2012 days, and now are available to us to do again. Probably the biggest one from a collaboration standpoint, interoperability and data exchange, is the fact that those things that we create in 2015, the Civil 3D, not only the DWG file format, but also the Civil 3D components can be leveraged, across 3 different versions, so 2015, 2014, and 2013. So that will give you some flexibility, not only maybe internally in your office, your ability to work with maybe some other consultants that maybe you've gone to 2015 and they haven't quite made the switch yet, they're still on 2014. You can still continue to work effectively with those folks back and forth with your designs and with your models. So with that, I thank you very much for your time and attention. Appreciate you spending a little time with us, or me, as I went through and talked about the technology review. And at this point, we will pause for a moment, and I can start to address any questions you may have.